He stood at the door and watched her drive away. His daughter was smiling. She turned back one last time and said the words he would carry with him for the rest of his life. "Do not worry, Dad. All the people up north are good people." He waved. The van turned the corner. And just like that she was gone. David Beck had no reason to worry. None at all. His daughter was 18 years old, responsible, and excited about her first real work trip. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. He went back inside. He would never see her again. Her name was Berit Beck. Most people who loved her called her Berry. And what happened to her on July 17, 1990, on a highway in Wisconsin between a shopping mall and a hotel she never reached, would remain unanswered for 23 years. Not because the evidence was not there. Because nobody asked the evidence the right question until 2013. His fingerprints were in her van from the very first day. 9 of them. On 5 separate items. Including the cosmetics box she had purchased that same afternoon less than an hour before she died. He had been right there in the evidence all along. Pressed onto surfaces. Sealed in bags. Filed in a box. Sitting in storage for over 2 decades while he drove his truck across state lines and came home and went to work and lived his life. His name was Dennis Brantner. And the moment investigators showed him Berit Beck's photograph in 2014, the color drained from his face, his hands became unsteady, and he began to cry. Not the slow measured grief of someone receiving difficult news. The sudden destabilizing collapse of someone ambushed by something they had spent 23 years keeping buried. Hit that like button right now. Share this video immediately because Berit Beck's story deserves to be seen by every person who believes that evidence never stops waiting to speak. Subscribe to Black Veil Crime Files with notifications on because we follow cases like this one all the way from the first unanswered phone call to the last word spoken in a courtroom. And stay until the very last second of this video because what this man carried in his toolbox at work for years after he killed her is something you are not prepared for. Let us go back to that July morning. Sturtevant, Wisconsin, who Berit Beck was. In Sturtevant, Wisconsin, the biggest news was usually a local football game or a neighbor's fence going up. It was the kind of town where nothing serious ever happened. And exactly the kind of town that has no idea how to handle it when something serious does. Berit Beck had just graduated from Case High School. She played violin in the school orchestra and music was not just a hobby for her. It was the thread running through every plan she had for her future. College was coming. The path was not fully clear yet, but wherever it led, music was going to be in it. In the meantime, she had done something most 18-year-olds do not think to do. She got a real job. Clerical work at a major company right there in Racine County. First paycheck. First professional routine. First real taste of adult life. She showed up every day without being told to. And just a few weeks in, she was selected to attend a 3-day computer training seminar in Appleton, Wisconsin, about 130 miles north. For a girl barely a month out of high school, that felt like a great deal. A work trip. A hotel room. A room full of adults treating her like a colleague. She was nervous and excited and ready all at the same time. Her parents felt it differently. David and Diane Beck supported her completely, but Appleton was not around the corner and Berit had never made a trip like this alone before. They helped her pack the family van, went over the route, and tried not to hover too much. Before she left, David did one last practical thing. He wrote down the van's mileage. Berit's company had agreed to cover her travel expenses, so they needed a record of how far she drove. A mundane detail. A few digits on a scrap of paper meant for a reimbursement form. David did not think twice about it. He did not know then that he had just documented the exact moment his daughter's life was hijacked. July 17, 1990, the last confirmed sighting. On the morning of July 17, 1990, Berit loaded up the van and headed north. One quick stop first at her boyfriend Kurt's house. A short visit, a few words about the seminar and the hotel, and then the open road. She left his house and pointed the van toward Appleton. The most direct route passed through Fond du Lac, a mid-sized city sitting about halfway across the state. Around noon she pulled into the parking lot of Forest Mall and walked into the Walgreens inside. A few cosmetics. Small purchases. The kind of things you pick up before a few days away from home. She paid at the counter and the register printed a receipt. Time-stamped. Ordinary. Completely unremarkable. To the cashier she was just another customer. Calm. Smiling. Completely at ease. No sign of stress. No sign of fear. No sense that anything in her world was wrong. She tucked the receipt into her purse, pushed open the glass doors of the mall, and walked out into the bright July sun. Berit Beck simply vanished. That evening David and Diane sat by the phone and waited. Berit had promised to call as soon as she checked into the hotel. That was the plan. That was what she always did. So they waited. First an hour. Then 2. Then through dinner. Then past dark. David checked the clock. Diane picked up the phone more than once just to make sure it had a dial tone. Nothing came. When they finally called the hotel themselves, the answer stopped them cold. Berit had never checked in. Her room was still empty. The front desk had no record of her at all. They called her coworkers. They called her friends. They called everyone who might have heard from her. One by one the answers came back the same. Nobody had seen her. Nobody had heard from her. She had simply stopped existing somewhere between that mall exit and the road to Appleton. The next morning her seat at the seminar sat empty. And David and Diane Beck made the call no parent ever wants to make. They called the police. The van, what 9 pieces of evidence were trying to say. 2 days after Berit vanished a tip came in. A van matching the description had been sitting in a parking lot in Fond du Lac. Officers found it almost immediately in the Kmart lot just a short walk from the Walgreens where Berit had last been seen. The doors were locked. Not left open. Not abandoned in a hurry. Locked. The way you lock a car when you are done with it and you are leaving deliberately. Whoever left this van here had the keys. They had locked up behind themselves and walked away. The radar detector was gone. The stereo had been ripped out. The early instinct was robbery. That theory collapsed within minutes. Because Berit's belongings were still inside. All of them. Her shoes. Her dress packed specifically for the seminar. Her clothes, her toiletries, everything she had brought for 3 days away. A thief willing to pull out a stereo does not leave a bag full of a young woman's personal items untouched. This was not a robbery. Then came the details that made the hair stand up. Cigarette ash. Thick piles of it on the floor behind the front passenger seat and along the left side near the driver. Not a quick smoke from someone who stopped to rest. This was the kind of ash that builds up over hours. Whoever had been sitting in this van had been in it for a long time. Windows up. Doors locked. Just sitting and smoking in the dark while the upholstery absorbed the smell of every cigarette. Berit did not smoke. Her family did not smoke. No one with any legitimate reason to be in that van smoked. Someone had been locked inside this vehicle for hours. Then the clothing. A red shirt crumpled on the floor. Torn. Not worn and tossed aside but ripped. A pink dress laid across the seat. And a pair of pantyhose tied into a tight deliberate knot. Not tangled the way things get when you pack in a hurry. Tied. The way you tie something when you mean to. Then they found the ring. Kurt had given Berit a sapphire ring she wore every single day. The kind of ring the people closest to her said never left her finger. It was not on her hand because her hand was not there. But the ring was in the van, tucked underneath the floor mat. Not dropped. Not rolled there by accident. A ring does not fall off a finger and land flat and hidden beneath a floor mat. It had been placed there deliberately. 2 cups. One from a hamburger restaurant she had stopped at that morning. One from a different fast food chain. Berit had made 1 food stop. 1 cup. 1 receipt. She had never visited the second restaurant. But there was a cup from it sitting in her van. And the fingerprints on it. Whose were they? Nobody knew yet. But the cup was bagged, tagged, and set aside. It would wait. Then came the number. Before Berit left home, David Beck had written down the van's mileage for the travel reimbursement form. Investigators pulled that number and held it against what the odometer now showed. The van had been driven 461 miles more than it should have been. Fond du Lac was roughly 100 miles from Sturtevant. Even with every stop accounted for, the math did not come close to working. Someone had taken this van and driven it far and for a long time before returning it to this parking lot 2 blocks from where Berit was last seen alive. What the search found and what the summer heat stole. Within days of Berit's disappearance, her face was everywhere. Flyers went up in post office lobbies, gas stations, and grocery store windows across Racine County. Her photo appeared on the sides of semi-trailers rolling down Wisconsin highways. Thousands of people driving past her smile every single day. A reward of $75,000 was announced. Over 100 volunteers showed up to search, walking in long lines through fields and ditches across Fond du Lac County, pushing through tall grass in the August heat. The searches turned up nothing. Tips came in and went cold. Days turned into weeks. On the morning of August 22, 1990, a farmer driving a rural road outside Waupun, Wisconsin, noticed something in the ditch along the side of the road. He slowed down. He stopped. He got out and looked. No sirens. No screaming. Just the sound of wind moving across a Wisconsin cornfield and a stillness that only comes when something is terribly, irreversibly wrong. He called the police. Officers arrived and found human remains. Weeks of summer heat had done what summer heat does. The passage of time had made identification difficult through traditional means. Dental records were pulled. Comparisons were made. The remains were Berit Beck. She had been out there for weeks. Lying in that ditch while her family searched. While her face traveled across the state on the sides of trucks. While her parents sat beside a phone that never brought the right call. The medical examiner went to work with what remained. A precise cause of death could not be confirmed. That word, inconclusive, would follow this case for years. A quiet frustration sitting beneath every report and every hearing. But the examination pointed firmly in one direction. The evidence pointed toward a deliberate act that ended her life. What the examiner could say with more confidence was the timeline. Based on the condition of the remains, Berit had almost certainly been killed on July 17th. The same day she disappeared. The same day she walked out of that Walgreens with a small bag of cosmetics and the rest of her life ahead of her. She had not been held somewhere for days. It ended on the same day it began. And then came the detail that reframed everything. The torn red shirt found crumpled on the floor of the van had been logged as evidence of a struggle. But when the remains were examined, that assumption quietly collapsed. A piece of fabric had been used to ensure she could not see her surroundings. Someone in the middle of whatever was happening to her had stopped, taken that torn piece of fabric, and tied it deliberately across the eyes of an 18-year-old girl. That was not panic. That was not the result of things spiraling out of control. That was a choice made calmly by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The wrong man and the lie that cost years. When an investigation has no answers, it looks for patterns. And in the months after Berit's murder, a pattern emerged that seemed to fit almost perfectly. A man investigators came to focus on had been active in the area around the time Berit disappeared. He stole cars. Not for parts. Not to sell quickly. He stole them and drove them long distances, Hundreds of miles, sitting behind someone else's wheel until he was done, then abandoning the vehicle and walking away. It was his signature move. In every practical sense he was a perfect shadow of whoever had taken Berit's van. Then he was arrested for robbing a bank. When officers searched his belongings they found a woman's hairbrush with blonde hair tangled in the bristles. Berit Beck had blonde hair. This was 1990. DNA analysis existed in early form but required weeks, specialized labs, and evidence in far better condition than a few strands in a hairbrush. Investigators noted the brush, bagged it, and held on to it. But they could not prove what it meant. Then one of his acquaintances came forward with a story. He told investigators there had been a direct confession. He claimed the man had described what he did and had even taken him to the van and shown him Berit's body inside before disposing of her. Investigators had been waiting for exactly this kind of break. The entire investigation reorganized itself around this man completely. And then it hit a wall it could not get past. His fingerprints did not match a single print found inside Berit's van. Not one. Without a fingerprint match and without a confession from the man himself, prosecutors held back. They kept him in their sights and kept looking for something stronger. That search lasted years. A decade passed. Then most of another one. And then quietly the story collapsed entirely. The acquaintance who had come forward and described the confession in such convincing detail admitted he had fabricated everything. He had a personal grudge. A private dispute that had curdled over years into something cold and deliberate. He had listened carefully when police spoke. He had picked up specific verifiable details about the case that were never made public. And he had built a lie around those details, precise enough and credible enough to redirect an entire murder investigation for years. An entire murder investigation redirected because one man wanted to settle a personal score. While investigators spent years watching the wrong person, the real killer drove his truck across state lines. Came home. Went to work. Existed in complete safety. 2013, the question nobody had asked. In 2013 a local news station in Wisconsin ran a cold case segment. Berit Beck's story was one of them. A few minutes of airtime. An old photograph. The brief facts. A young woman. A family van. A roadside ditch outside Waupun. 23 years without an answer. One person watching that news segment understood exactly what the world of 2013 meant for an unsolved case with a box of old evidence sitting in storage. His name was Nate Lamont. In July of 1990 Lamont had been a dispatcher with the Fond du Lac County Sheriff's Office. He had been on the other end of those first calls. The missing woman. The abandoned van. The body in the ditch. He had heard this case develop in real time and watched it go cold. For more than 2 decades he had carried it the way investigators carry the ones that never got resolved. Quietly. Persistently. Like a splinter that never fully works its way out. When he saw that news segment he made a decision. Lamont pulled the case file and started reading from the beginning. What he found did not take long to locate. And it stopped him completely. The fingerprints collected from Berit's van in 1990 had been compared against a handful of early suspects. No match. And then they had been filed. Pressed onto paper cards. Placed in an envelope. Put in a box. Shelved for 23 years while everything around them changed. AFS. The Automated Fingerprint Identification System. A national digital database now containing the prints of millions of people with criminal records. In 1990 fingerprint work meant a trained examiner holding a magnifying glass over a paper card, manually comparing ridge patterns against a limited set of known suspects. You could only find what you already knew to look for. The unmatched prints from Berit's van had been checked against the people investigators were already watching. Nobody beyond that circle. Nobody further. Nobody wider. Lamont submitted the prints to the Wisconsin Crime Laboratory. Within weeks the system returned a match. 9 fingerprints lifted from 5 separate items inside Berit's van. All belonging to the same person. Dennis Brett Brantner. Kenosha, Wisconsin. The name had never appeared in the case file. Not once across 23 years of investigation. He was not in the notes. He was not in any interview record. He had never been a suspect, never been questioned, never been looked at in any capacity. He was a complete stranger to everyone who had spent decades trying to find out who killed Berit Beck. But his fingerprints had been in her van from the very first day. Who Dennis Brantner was and what the pattern revealed. Lamont built a profile. The more he learned, the more the ground shifted beneath him. Brantner had been driving trucks since 1979. Long-haul routes. Cross-country miles. The kind of work that puts a man on the road through dozens of counties without anyone tracking his movements. His routes passed through Fond du Lac County regularly. And in the summer of 1990 he had been living in Green Lake, Wisconsin, roughly 30 miles from the ditch where Berit's body was found. His record went back years. Car theft. Burglary. The kind of history that puts a person's prints into the system in the first place. But one file entry made Lamont pause. In 1989, exactly 1 year before Berit's murder, Brantner had stolen a vehicle in Green Lake. He did not sell it. He drove it. More than 900 miles. Alone across long stretches of Wisconsin road. When police recovered the car, they found the same thing investigators had found in Berit's van. Large piles of cigarette ash pressed into the seats, ground into the floor. The kind of residue left by someone who sits in an enclosed space for hours with nowhere to be and nobody watching. Same behavior. Same geography. 1 year earlier. And then 1994. Brantner had separated from his second wife. One evening as she finished her shift and walked to her car, he was already inside it. Hidden. Waiting in silence until she got in. The moment she did, he produced a knife. He forced her to drive. He controlled where she went and what she did, and he held her against her will for hours. She eventually got free. He was arrested for unlawful restraint and battery. The car was not the target. The car was the trap. He used it the same way both times. As an enclosed space where a woman had nowhere to run and no one could hear her. For Brantner, a vehicle was not transportation. It was a hunting ground. In late March of 2014, investigators drove to Kenosha. They asked questions and they watched his face. When they showed him a photograph of Berit Beck, his composure broke on the spot. The color left his face. His hands became unsteady. And then he began to cry. He denied everything. He had never met her. He had never been in her van. He could not explain any of it. When investigators told him his fingerprints had been found on multiple items inside that vehicle, he said he did not remember. He said he did not know how it was possible. And then when they pressed him directly on whether he had harmed her, the denial he reached for came out fractured and incomplete. If I did, I did. And if I did, I do not know. Not an admission. Not a denial. Something in between that told investigators everything they needed to know about what kind of man they were sitting across from. Among the 9 fingerprints found on 5 items in that van was one that made the case impossible to talk around. The cosmetics box. The products Berit had purchased at the Walgreens inside Forest Mall on the afternoon of July 17, 1990. She had bought them that day, carried them out of the store, and placed them in the van. They were fresh purchases, handled only by her. That box was not an old item sitting in the glove compartment for months. It had been in Berit's hands within the hour. For Brantner's fingerprints to be on it, he was not someone who simply found the van after she left. He was there at that mall, at that moment, close enough to touch what she was carrying on the last afternoon of her life. The arrest, the trial, and the photograph in the toolbox. On the morning of March 27, 2015, Dennis Brantner walked out of the Kenosha County Courthouse after a hearing on an unrelated firearm charge. He pushed through the doors, stepped outside, and found Fond du Lac County detectives waiting for him on the other side. They arrested him on the spot. First-degree murder. Berit Beck. July 17, 1990. During the booking process, a deputy found something tucked inside Brantner's left boot. A bag containing 37 oxycodone pills. No prescription. Hidden from the detectives who had already patted him down. Carried across county lines without a word. 25 years after Berit's murder, the man investigators believed had taken her life was still hiding things in his boots and hoping no one would check. Bond was set at $1 million cash. As the arrest became public, people who had worked alongside Brantner started coming forward. 3 former co-workers from a Kenosha welding plant told investigators the same story independently. Brantner had kept a photograph clipped to the inside of his toolbox. A photo of a young blonde woman. He told them she was his girlfriend. They had believed him because why would they not? But when Berit's face appeared in news coverage of the arrest, they recognized her immediately. He had carried her photograph to work for years. Shown it to colleagues. Claimed her as his own. A girl he had murdered. Whose family had spent decades not knowing what happened to her. Whose name had been on scholarship certificates and memorial flyers and a grave in Mount Pleasant. And he had shown her face to strangers at work and told them she was his. The trial began in the summer of 2016. More than 2 weeks of testimony. More than 40 witnesses. The prosecution laid out the fingerprint evidence, the behavioral pattern, the 1989 vehicle theft with its matching cigarette ash, the 1994 kidnapping of his wife, the photograph in the toolbox. They built the case piece by piece. But the defense had a weapon the prosecution could not fully counter. The state crime laboratory had lost evidence. The jacket, gone. The fast food cup carrying Brantner's fingerprint, gone. Key physical items that had been collected from the van in 1990, catalogued, and entrusted to the state's own facility had simply disappeared from storage over the decades. The defense stood in front of the jury and asked the question that prosecutors had no clean answer to. If the evidence was so solid, where was it? If the fingerprints were so damning, why could they not be retested and reconfirmed today? The state's own system had failed Berit Beck a second time. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Notes went back and forth to the judge. One juror became ill and spent a night in the emergency room. The foreman sent word that they could not agree. Not on guilt. Not on innocence. Judge Gary Sharp declared a mistrial. 10 years, a cherry tree, and the words he never said. The district attorney announced he would retry the case. But preparing for a second trial uncovered a legal trap that no one wanted to navigate. Because of how Wisconsin's statute of limitations applied to the specific charges, a conviction on a lesser charge carried the risk that Brantner could use the limitation period to avoid additional punishment entirely. The law written for a different era had not accounted for cases that took 25 years to reach a courtroom. After long and painful consultations with Berit's family, they found a path forward. In February of 2018, Dennis Brantner stood before a judge in Fond du Lac County and entered an Alford plea. Under an Alford plea, a defendant does not admit guilt. They simply acknowledge that the evidence against them is strong enough that a jury would likely convict. Brantner accepted a sentence for second-degree reckless homicide. A charge that carried a maximum of 10 years. He never said he did it. Not once. Not in the interview room in 2014. Not in the courtroom in 2018. The closest he ever came was a fractured half-sentence in a police interview. If I did, I did. 10 years. The maximum allowed under the charge. Before delivering it, the judge looked at Dennis Brantner and said the words plainly. The public needs to be protected from you. The 10-year sentence would run consecutively, beginning only after Brantner finished serving 6.5 years for the oxycodone charges. Under Wisconsin's older sentencing laws, he would be eligible for parole after just 2.5 years into the murder sentence. District Attorney Eric Toney stood in the courthouse and told reporters what he actually felt. In almost every respect, 10 years feels too little. Berit's brother Ben, who had said goodbye to his sister that same July morning without knowing it was the last time, spoke at the sentencing hearing. This was a slow, horrible torture that no family should have to endure. Would she be a wife, a mother, a career woman, a professional musician? We will never know. David Beck, the man who had stood at his front door on a summer morning and waved as his daughter drove away, paused several times while speaking to hold back tears. After 27 years, he said, there is no preparation you can make for this day. Outside Case High School in Sturtevant, a cherry tree stands in the courtyard near the music room. It has been there since 1991, planted by Berit's classmates on what would have been her 19th birthday in the place where she used to play her violin. Every year the Berit Beck Memorial Music Scholarship is awarded to a student at Case High School who plans to study music after graduation. The concert that raises money for it has run for decades. A second tree grows at the Racine County Fairgrounds, planted by her 4-H club members who needed somewhere to put what they were feeling. Her grave at West Lawn Memorial Park still receives visitors every July 17th. On the morning she left home, Berit Beck turned back at the door with a smile and told her father not to worry. All the people up north are good people. She was 18 years old and she believed that completely. She had no reason not to. The man who proved her wrong never once said the word guilty out loud. He took a legal exit that let him walk away without admitting what he did. He kept her photograph in his toolbox at work for years and told strangers she was his girlfriend. He will be free before most people have finished paying off a car loan. But every spring a student at Case High School walks across a stage and receives a scholarship with Berit's name on it. Every year that cherry tree outside the music room puts out new growth. And somewhere in the memory of everyone who knew her and the many more who only learned her name through a cold case file, Barry's music plays on. Leave a comment right now and tell me what moment in this case stopped you completely cold. Was it the van locked up neat and deliberate with her ring hidden under the floor mat? Was it the 461 extra miles on the odometer? Was it the photograph he kept in his toolbox? Was it the words David Beck said at that sentencing hearing after 27 years of waiting? Or was it the 10-year sentence? Tell me what you think about that. Because in cases like this the conversation does not end when the video does. Subscribe to Black Veil Crime Files with notifications on. Share this video right now because Berit Beck deserves to be remembered by every person who will ever wave goodbye to someone they love and trust them to come home safe. This is Black Veil Crime Files. I will see you in the next one. Blackheart.